the exact location of your emergency.
She said, I feel nasty about what I've done.
And I was quiet for almost a year.
Comes back to a Nancy Amons, D. David revoked.
That is repulsive.
This looks like a firing squad.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Nancy Amons with the Channel 4i team. Tonight, a special report, Influence, Infidelity, and Men in Power. It's an investigation that began after police closed the book on a suicide here at the Stallman building. Now, this detective's report contains allegations and names that are so compelling, we just had to explore them. Friends of Lee Terry say she had it all. She was beautiful, smart, classy, from a Belmead family, her father a surgeon. But there was a dark side, her friends say. She drank and mixed alcohol with prescription drugs. A series of drunk driving charges landed her in the court system. Her interactions with a judge and a defense attorney and a trip to Mobile, Alabama, became part of a police investigation into her death.
911, what's the exact location of your emergency?
May 25, 2016, a maintenance man at the Stallman building in downtown Nashville calls 911.
I'm pretty sure that maybe somebody passed away.
Lee Terry was found on her bed, a Smith & Wesson handgun similar to this one at her temple. Police later established she'd been dead about 3 weeks. Metro Police conducted an investigation that would take months. They eventually concluded it was a suicide. But during the investigation, witnesses whose statements were recorded by Metro detectives recounted threats that they say Terry had made in Alabama, threats to expose 2 of the men on that trip, General Sessions Judge Casey Moreland and his friend, defense attorney Brian Lewis.
You can sit wherever you want. You can sure. Yeah.
Lewis was interviewed the day after Terry's body was found. The apartment where she was found, both her name and Lewis's name are on the lease.
Yeah, I co-signed the lease, I think, around beginning of April.
Lewis would confirm something in a second interview a month later. It was recorded at Central Precinct. He confirmed that he and Terry had a sexual relationship. Lewis is married.
It would be classified a friend and a friend with benefits. Had I had sex with her on occasions? Yes.
The relationship began, he told police, after he represented Terry in a 2013 DUI case, a case that records show ended with Terry serving no jail time, though it was her 3rd offense, a case where court records show Judge Casey Moreland ended Terry's probation early. A few years later, in late April 2016, Moreland was on that Alabama trip right before Terry's suicide. It was a trip that witnesses say turned awkward, ending with Lewis sending Terry home early.
She was just mad that whole day. It was one of those deals where she was just mad that whole day and was just abusive towards everybody.
Terry's friend, Nancy Amons, was on that trip. She says Terry was arguing with Lewis.
And I just know that she was irate.
Amons told police Terry had threatened to expose an affair between Terry and Lewis and threatened to divulge something she had recently seen on Lewis's computer.
She threatened him, and she's like, the gig's up, and she said, and I'm not talking about your wife.
I took that as an idle type threat from her, something that was made in the heat of the moment, and that, that she wouldn't follow through with.
2 months after Terry's body was discovered, detectives interviewed Judge Moreland at his office in the courthouse. Police confirmed the judge's interview was not recorded. The detective's notes indicate Moreland was asked about Terry's threats. Moreland said he thought she would calm down and come to her senses. He says he felt sadness about her death. The detective's investigation concluded that Terry did in fact commit suicide using a gun owned by Brian Lewis. Several of Terry's friends who gave interviews to police say they still have questions.
Lee Terry never would have killed herself. Not like that.
John Nichols had been Terry's friend for 10 years. Several of Terry's friends say she never would have killed herself without first making sure her dog Lana was taken care of.
she loved that little dog. She worshiped this little dog. And I mean, Lana was her best friend. It was her companion. And I just, knowing what I know about Lee, she never would have put Lana in harm's way, ever. Ever.
I just want it investigated, really investigated.
Roy Matlock dated Terry in 2015.
I think it needs to be reopened.
Police listed 20 reasons for concluding the death was a suicide. The most convincing, police said, was that blood splatter evidence showed no one was near Terry when she pulled the trigger. But friends still have questions. Why didn't the man paying her rent and bills come back to the apartment after that argument in Alabama? Surveillance video would show that after the Mobile trip on May 3rd, Lewis came to the Stallman to pay Terry's rent. The video shows he went to the office on the first floor, then left without going upstairs. That was the last time police found Lewis used his swipe card to enter the building.
She was there for 21 days in an apartment that was rented by, Brian Lewis, and he didn't think to check on her.
Lewis told police he wasn't going to visit Terry until she called to apologize. Coming up, allegations that Terry swapped sex with the judge for help in her case. And our investigation found she wasn't the only woman claiming a sexual relationship with the judge led to a better outcome in court.
And I was quiet for almost a year.
And she made the comment, she says, oh, well, but I slept with the judge, so it's not going to be any big deal.
It was like her last resort.
Welcome back to our I-Team investigation, Influence, Infidelity, and Men in Power. Before the break, you heard from a woman who says her affair with Judge Casey Moreland made her court fines disappear. But that's not all. This may be the last video taken of Lee Terry alive. Security camera footage from the Stallman building. It's now in the evidence vault. Police say the night of May 4th, 2016, Terry walked her dog Lana one last time, went into her 9th floor apartment alone, then shot and killed herself. During the detectives' investigation into her death, witnesses said Terry told them she had sex with Judge Casey Moreland.
She was like, Natalie, I was out of options. It was that, or I was looking at serious jail time.
Natalie Amons was Lee Terry's former roommate. Amons says Terry told her she had sex with Moreland to get out of a DUI. Roy Matlock, Terry's former boyfriend, says Terry told him the same thing.
She said, I feel nasty about what I've done. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And she says, I told you I slept with the judge in order to get out of my charges.
We were not able to independently confirm the allegation. We know that Judge Moreland's name appears on court papers that shortened Terry's probation and that she never reported to jail to serve a 5-day sentence. And we know that her attorney was the judge's friend, Brian Lewis. This isn't the first time the close relationship between Moreland and Lewis has been in the news. You may remember the case of developer David Chase. In the summer of 2014, Chase was arrested, accused of assaulting a girlfriend he'd been involved with. Chase called Lewis to step in as his attorney. A phone call from Lewis to his friend Judge Moreland led to special treatment for Chase. He was not required to spend 12 hours in jail to cool off like any other defendant. Police say Chase was let go that night. He returned and attacked the same woman a second time. The case was dismissed after the prosecutor said the alleged victim's statements were inconsistent. But the course of events in the Chase case led to a rare public reprimand for Moreland. And Lewis, he pled guilty to violating a code of conduct expected of attorneys. He agreed to accept a public censure. Lewis has denied our request for an interview. Our investigation also found that Moreland intervened in court proceedings on behalf of Natalie Amons. She also had a history of drunk driving charges.
2 DUIs.
She says that in 2015, she was struggling to pay her fines, $1,200, and mentioned it to her friend Lee Terry.
And she said, well, I can call Casey. And I was like, Casey? She said, Judge Moreland.
The three met at Pinewood Social. Amons says she was hoping to get more time to pay the fines since she was working.
I was just really honest with him. And I'm like, obviously I shouldn't have procrastinated. I've been calling and calling, and I'm kind of screwed here. I just need 4 weeks and I can pay this off. And he just is writing and not saying anything. And I'm like, So if you could just tell me who to call, that'd be so helpful. And he's like, that's what I'm doing. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm sorry, I'll be quiet. And then he just said, text me, this information. And I did. And I just really thought I was going to get an extension, and it just went away.
The court's computer system shows that on July 14, 2015, her fines were all waived by Moreland, even though Amons says she never filled out any paperwork or appeared in court.
No.
Nothing?
No, and I didn't even know about that until today, honestly.
There's a form you were supposed to fill out to say you were applying for indigency.
I didn't know about that until today.
Did you ever go to court?
No.
It just disappeared?
Yes.
Natalie thanked the judge by text messages. She saved the text she says Moreland sent her in exchange. Your fees, fines, and court costs are taken care of. Now you officially owe me. Ha ha. The I-Team approached Judge Moreland. We had a lot of questions.
This looks like a firing squad.
We asked for an interview about the Alabama trip, about Lee Terry, and about Natalie.
Natalie Amons.
We asked to sit down and talk on camera.
All right, well, let me try to figure out what a good time would be.
Okay.
We've continued to press the judge for an interview. He declined. We did obtain a written statement prepared for the media but never sent to us. It was part of an open records request we filed for Moreland's emails. Moreland had hired a PR firm to craft a response. He said, in part, while I had limited acquaintance with both Miss Terry and Miss Amons, I have never had an improper relationship with either of them.
We also discovered that Judge Moreland helped get tickets dismissed for Amons and that he intervened in a traffic stop right near here when she was pulled over by the police. You'll hear what happened next when we come back. Now back to our Channel 4 I-Team investigation, Influence, Infidelity, and Men in Power. We told you before the break that a woman who said she was having an affair with Judge Casey Moreland got her fines dismissed, but that's not all.
I mean, my $1,200 was just gone.
Natalie Amons wasn't robbed, she got a windfall. Old court fines, she said, were dismissed by Judge Casey Moreland. And that's not all. Court records show Moreland helped her with traffic tickets. Moreland texts her, I can help in Davidson County. He reminds her to send a picture, and she does. They exchange suggestive comments. He says, so you want me to give you a little attention, and mentions a midday quick and dirty. So what happened to the tickets? We found these records at the traffic court clerk's office. The case is retired with no fines due.
I'm very grateful when people are in a position to help me, and sometimes everyone needs help.
Natalie texts the judge the following week mentioning the tickets and tells Moreland, thanks so much for your help, much appreciated. Moreland texts, they are gone, ha ha ha. Amons writes, I know, that's crazy. Moreland asks about meeting at her apartment the next day. What are you doing tomorrow between 3:30 and 5:30? Just be horny and naked, the text says. Then Moreland's texts go into details that we can't say on TV. It isn't the only time Moreland helped Amons. June 16th at 3:20 in the afternoon, motorcycle officer Michael Douglas of Central Precinct tells me he's just starting a shift when he notices a woman driving without a seatbelt and her tags are expired.
93.6 Peabody, Tennessee.
He calls dispatch to find out if she has a valid driver's license. She doesn't.
Comes back to a Natalie Amons, D. David revoked.
She's Natalie Amons, a very close friend of General Sessions Judge Casey Moreland. She says she calls the judge, then they send a series of text messages back and forth. She shared what she said were the texts between them. Moreland texts her, find out the officer's name. She writes, Michael Douglas. Moreland writes, if I need to talk to him, I will. She texts Moreland that the officer is running her license, adding, it's the last thing I need right now. Moreland texts, I gotcha, girl. Then he texts, what's happening? Did you drop my name? But the officer continues to write her a ticket until Moreland makes a phone call to the officer's supervisor at Central Precinct. Metro Police verify what happened next in a written statement. That Sergeant Mark Byrne, Douglas's supervisor, was contacted by Judge Moreland. Police say Moreland tells the sergeant that Amos was on the way to his office for a meeting. The statement says Byrne perceived that Judge Moreland wanted the motorist to be allowed to continue to his office. Byrne rides his police motorcycle over to where Amos is stopped to convey that message to the officer. Moreland texts Amos that help is on the way, and she writes, "Sweet." Amos is allowed to drive away on a revoked license. She doesn't get a citation for it, just the ticket for no seatbelt and expired tags. So what kind of business did Amos have with Moreland at his office the day she was stopped by the motorcycle officer? Amos showed us texts she said were between her and Moreland. The texts back and forth show they didn't have a meeting planned, no official business. In fact, when she was stopped, Amos was on her way to meet the judge at a bar called the Batter's Box. After they met for drinks, Amos said they did go back to the courthouse to have sex in Moreland's office. Moreland texts her at 6:30 that night, "Damn, you're hot." The next afternoon, Amos texts that she's super grateful for his help. The judge texts, "Just used my superpowers." And then, "My desk still has butt marks on it." Our I-Team investigation also found Moreland sending texts while he was on the bench, once mentioning he was listening to information about a wiretap during a cocaine case, another time sending a picture of the defendants before him. And sometimes he referred to the defendants in his sex trafficking and drug court as hoes and junkies. We shared those texts with law professor Charlie Jay. He's a Carnegie Fellow who's testified before the U.S. Senate as an expert on judicial ethics.
If what is reported here is true, this may not be a judge who is well suited to the bench. And so I think that the best bet is to step down.
As our Channel 4 I-Team investigation continued, Judge Casey Moreland stepped aside from two of the dockets he'd been handling. One specialized in people with alcohol and drug problems. I went to cover the drug court docket, but apparently they didn't want me inside.
93 defendants are here for court today, but they're all about to be sent home. Channel 4's I-Team is here.
Wow. Whoa, it's the news.
They just let everyone out because Channel 4 was there?
Yeah, I got a free day.
The Channel 4 I-Team also found we weren't welcome when we started looking into the halfway houses where Moreland had been sending defendants.
This is Harrington Avenue in Madison. There are 8 halfway houses on this street. Most of them have 8 residents each. They're primarily people with drug or alcohol charges who were sent here by a judge. Before Judge Casey Moreland stepped aside from his duties as drug court judge, this is where some of the people he sentenced ended up. But as we've often found when looking into the way drug court operates, cameras aren't always welcome.
I'm Nancy from Channel 4, by the way.
She's one of the housing directors.
You can't have cameras pointing at the houses.
The houses on Harrington Avenue are owned or operated by a nonprofit called Recovery Community, Inc. Lynn Nolan is the executive director. You'll find her picture on the General Sessions Court's website under Treatment Court Staff and Providers.
We really enjoy helping them and seeing the growth.
Some former graduates have glowing commentaries about Recovery Community, Inc., like this woman. She posted on their Facebook page that she was a broken and lost woman. Now she's truly blessed to be a resident. But we've also heard from people who question what they consider a too cozy arrangement between Nolan's program and Casey Moreland. We'll call this person Butch. He was in Nolan's treatment program.
She referred to Casey as a confidant, and that they talked about things related to other matters other than the drug program.
Recovery Community, Inc. is not a government agency. Lynn Nolan is not a Metro employee. But credit card records we obtained under the Open Records Act show Nolan traveled with Moreland and others to conventions, including a trip to California. That travel was billed to Metro taxpayers with Moreland's approval, until Metro auditors caught it and said no, taxpayers shouldn't pay for people who aren't city employees.
She referred to it one time as a junket, and just talked about what a great deal it was and what a good time she had.
I don't have anything to do with all the financial matters in that. I'm really just here to help people. I'm not an accountant.
Did you not know that the city was paying for your travel?
I'm sure you have all that records.
Do you think it was right for the Metro taxpayers to pay for your travel?
I mean, I didn't know that they were paying for my travel.
City auditors found out and asked for reimbursement. Moreland's friend, prominent attorney Brian Lewis, wrote a check to cover the expenses. At the time, he was president of a foundation that raises money for Moreland's drug court. Insiders who've been in the recovery community program tell us something else that bothered them. They said when the houses on Harrington Avenue needed maintenance or upgrades, clients were told to do the work as part of their community service time.
A carpenter, he's at the top of the list to work there because he can do drywall, and a plumber, he can work on our bathrooms in those houses.
Nolan says she hires tradespeople to work on the houses, but says yes, sometimes clients help.
I say, well, what do you know how to do? Well, I can, paint. Okay, well, we can paint something.
But it's not mandatory.
No.
Now, the people who stay in the houses pay $140 a week for rent. Multiply that times 8 people, that's about $5,000 a month in rent for each house. And add to that the grant money they get, about $95,000 a year. Their financial statements show that Recovery Community, Inc. is more than breaking even. Our I-Team investigation continued to uncover favors that Judge Moreland did for those close to him. We discovered that Moreland's future son-in-law was convicted of drunk driving, but when the judge intervened, that jail sentence mysteriously vanished. Here's the I-Team's Demetria Kaladimos.
The arrest report tells a dangerous, potentially deadly story. In the wee hours of October 30th, 2015, a man in a black Toyota 4Runner drove the wrong way onto I-40, heading east in the westbound lane. A Metro police officer managed to get him safely off the highway into a nearby parking lot. The driver was 26-year-old Christopher Plattenberg, who, according to police, admitted drinking that night. In fact, when the officer asked, on a scale of 1 to 10, how impaired he might be, Plattenberg answered 1,002. Records show his blood was drawn at General Hospital to test for alcohol. Then Christopher Plattenberg was taken to jail and booked for DUI. It would be his second drunk driving arrest in 2 years. A second offense DUI is a serious crime in Tennessee with serious consequences. The law calls for jail time, starting at 45 days, up to just shy of a year. A mandatory fine of $600 to $3,500. You can lose your license for 2 years, lose your car altogether. There's a mandatory alcohol and drug treatment program, and the judge can order an ignition interlock device on your vehicle at your expense. So what happened to accused second-time offender Chris Plattenberg? The court records are interesting. After getting out of jail on his own recognizance, he first appeared before Judge Casey Moreland in early January of last year, 3 months after the DUI arrest. The judge continued the case until March. Ultimately, Judges Gail Robinson and Aaron Holt took over, allowing Plattenberg to plead guilty to a lesser charge of reckless endangerment. According to the court records, he agreed to a suspended sentence of 11 months and 29 days, a fine of $350, an alcohol counseling class, 60 hours of public service work, 10 days in jail, and the installation of an interlock device. But then it appears something changed. In an undated order signed by Judge Gail Robinson, the court declared him indigent, waiving his court costs and probation fees. A document with Judge Moreland's type name but signed by Judge Aaron Holt appears to strike the interlock device. And a month later, there is an email from the sheriff's office to the criminal court clerk saying, recall the committal on Christopher Plattenberg. In other words, waive the 10 days in jail. He is, quote, time served per Judge Moreland. Now we checked. The total time Plattenberg served in jail was 3 hours and 21 minutes on the October night he was first arrested. The timing of every decision in this case is critical when you consider the fact that Christopher Plattenberg is now engaged to marry Judge Casey Moreland's daughter. Their online bridal registry tells the story. The two began dating in December of 2015, less than 2 months after Chris's DUI arrest. By the time the case started moving through the courts, they were a couple, and they've been dating steadily ever since. After his plea bargain in March and Judge Moreland's forgiveness of his jail time in April, Plattenberg apparently asked Casey that summer for his daughter's hand. On October 8th, he proposed. A November wedding is planned. We brought the file to the attention of the district attorney's office. After all, they had to agree to any plea bargain and sign off on all the terms. DA Glenn Funk says they had no idea jail time had been erased. Quote, "These facts are very disturbing. Our office was unaware that the negotiated disposition of this case was altered without notice to the state. The state has a right to be heard on any sentencing matter. Generally, this office does not oppose judicial waiver of fines and costs for indigent defendants. However, when a defendant seeks a waiver of a specifically negotiated probation requirement, such as installation of an interlock device, then the state must be given notice of this application. For a judge to waive service of an agreed-upon jail sentence without notice to the state is improper. Given that this defendant appears to have a personal connection to the judge, the actions are even more concerning." Funk goes on to say, "I shared this information with federal authorities who are investigating Judge Casey Moreland. At this time, the U.S. Attorney's Office has asked me to defer to their investigation."
The judge faced even more scrutiny for what was happening in his courtroom, this time for what he didn't do when the I-Team uncovered a relationship between an inmate and a court officer in Moreland's own court. Here's the I-Team's Jeremy Finley.
The law reads an inmate can't consent to sexual relations with a deputy, that the deputy is considered an authority figure, and the Sheriff's Department policy forbids romantic relationships. So why then did neither police nor the Sheriff's Office hear about this so-called relationship from the judge, who admits he was more than told about it? Desiree Moss is the first to admit her relationship with Lucas Frawley, displayed on social media, raises eyebrows.
We understand our relationship is weird. We understand that it came out weird, but I mean, it is what it is.
After all, while Moss was in and out of Casey Moreland's court on drug charges, the deputy specifically assigned to escort inmates in that court was Lucas Frawley.
He took me to jail 3 or 4 times.
Listen to this. Moss was last in the Davidson County Jail in November. On January 9th, Frawley resigned from the sheriff's office. 2 weeks after that, the two were engaged. At some point, this picture was posted online, reading "free and clear," and it feels so good. Don't you see that that looks a little questionable?
I understand that it's questionable.
And speaking of questionable, we showed them what we'd obtained. Facebook and text messages that Frawley and Moss admit they sent to 2 different people. She wrote, "All that matters is that he is out and didn't get charged." He texted, "It's all good, got swept under the rug." You say, "It's all good, got swept under the rug."
Yeah, so that was my attempt at playing with the people that run that site.
That site is this, a blog criticizing the Sheriff's Department. And the intention of these messages, they say, was to see if it would show up on the blog. Why send misinformation?
I thought it was amusing.
But Frawley quickly learned people in the courthouse weren't amused. And he says Judge Moreland was told about the rumors of their relationship.
He just basically came to me and told me about the rumors. And that was the extent of the conversation.
So consider that. A sitting criminal court judge who heard about a rumored relationship between his deputy and an inmate. A relationship, if proved true, would violate the Sheriff's Department's own policy and perhaps the law if they'd had sexual relations. So what did the judge report to police and to the Sheriff's Office? Nothing. The Sheriff's Office confirms they started investigating on a tip from someone else, and police have no investigation into Frawley.
We just wanted to be able to try to talk to you for fair and accuracy purposes.
We wanted to interview the judge about what he knew about this now engaged couple.
If you had any knowledge of that relationship.
Despite repeated requests, Moreland has denied to do an on-camera interview. But the judge told me over the phone he wasn't just told about the rumors, he was shown a sexual photograph of Moss and Frawley together. He says he told Frawley to resign, and that he thought Frawley would tell the Sheriff's Department. But listen to what Frawley says about that. The judge said that he told you you needed to resign. Is that true?
No.
You had a little hesitation there.
Casey Moreland is a good guy, and I don't want to speak out against him. I would never. It's a great individual.
Plus, Frawley and Moss say there was nothing for the judge to report because they say they had no relationship while they were in his court.
Not while I was in custody, not at all. Not while I was in drug court.
Here's what they say, that they did have a fling before she was arrested. And yes, just 2 weeks after he resigned, they got engaged, but they say nothing happened in between. Doesn't that seem to be some questionable timing?
Well, we can call it strange all you want, but I mean, that's exactly what it is.
You have heard the name Brian Lewis on our newscast many times.
He's a lawyer who was first disciplined along with former Judge Casey Moreland in the David Chase domestic violence case. The judge let Chase leave jail early after a request from attorney Brian Lewis. And since January, we've been reporting on the mysterious suicide of Brian Lewis's lover. She had just returned from a trip with Lewis and Judge Moreland. Well, tonight, an exclusive interview with a man who knows attorney Lewis quite well, his own brother. He talked exclusively to the I-Team's Nancy Amons.
Brad Lewis's tattoos paint a portrait of a pretty rough character. But he says his older brother, who's been in the news a lot lately, prominent Nashville attorney Brian Lewis, he says he is even rougher.
I think he is a menace to society.
Brian Lewis's name has been mentioned often in our investigation into former General Sessions Judge Casey Moreland. Lewis and Moreland have been longtime friends and travel buddies.
Him and my brother were thick as thieves, thick as thieves. They went everywhere together.
Moreland resigned effective April 4th. That's after he was charged with trying to bribe his former lover, Natalie Amons, and have drugs planted on her. Amons had told police last year she was suspicious about the death of her former roommate, Lee Terry. Terry was Brian Lewis's lover. Police concluded that Terry committed suicide last May in the apartment that Brian Lewis rented for her. Brad Lewis, Brian's brother, is speaking publicly for the first time, only to the Channel 4 I-Team. Brad Lewis says he has concerns about the death of Lee Terry. While he has no evidence it was anything but a suicide, he says he's often wondered if his brother drove her to it.
He could have threatened her and maybe she thought that she was going to die anyways. I think the Lee Terry death investigation needs to be looked at harder because my brother has a tendency for violence, mental manipulation. He's a thug with a law license. He is a thug with a law license.
The brothers became estranged 8 years ago. Brad Lewis says tension is escalating because he says his brother knows he turned over information to federal prosecutors. Prosecutors investigating Casey Moreland in a public corruption case.
And you feel strongly enough about what your brother has done that you were willing to talk to the FBI about it?
Absolutely. 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 I know how I've felt these past 8 years with the threat and intimidation, and it's not a good feeling. Not a good feeling whatsoever.
Brad Lewis says he made authorities aware of an incident involving his brother in 2004. It concerns claims that Brian Lewis had a role in the alleged beating of a man he suspected was stealing from him. A man on a crew doing electrical work at Brian Lewis's home on Ashland City Highway.
My brother was renovating his house for resale.
It was 2004. Metro Records confirmed that Massey Electric was the electrical contractor. Brad Lewis says his brother told him how he had that worker beaten in a back room at the Massey Electric office.
They choked, tortured this guy for an undisclosed amount of time. I was told that if this guy brought this to the attention of the authorities, that he would be killed, his family would be killed, and that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I heard it from my brother's mouth.
What was his demeanor like as he was telling you that?
He thought it was funny.
He thought it was funny?
Yeah, sure did.
And they beat his ass.
Brian Meyer was another electrical worker on that job.
I've only shared it with a small group of people.
Meyer is a mechanic. In 2004, he was an electrician's apprentice at Massey Electric. Meyer says he unknowingly bought some hunting gear his coworker had stolen from Brian Lewis's job site. Meyer says Brian Lewis called him and made threats.
What did he say?
He's like, look, man, I know you got my stuff and everything. Oh, man, you don't give me my stuff back, I'm find out who your family is. I'm going to find out them, and I'm going to kill them, and I'm going to kill you. And I'm like, he's like, I got connections with the mob and all that stuff. And I'm like, what?
Did you take him seriously when he said he was going to kill you,
Yeah.
your family?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this guy's got power. How can you not sit there and fear somebody that's got power?
Myers says Brian Lewis showed up with a lot of squad cars. Then he was handcuffed and taken before a night court commissioner.
Next thing I know, I look over and the door opens up. There's Brian Lewis over the judge's thing going, I got you. Tapping on the glass going, I got you, son of a bitch.
Brian Lewis was behind the glass where the judge was?
Yeah.
Did you think that was unusual?
Oh, yeah, you know, there's a guy who's accused me of stealing his shit. He's right there, you know, and I'm like, what?
Did you have the feeling things were not going to go well?
Oh yeah, I already heard the taps already being played. It was done. I was done.
Court records show that Meyer took a plea deal. He pled guilty to a felony and got 4 years probation and had to pay restitution to Brian Lewis.
And it was mostly like, well, this is what they want.
What, who wants?
Brian Lewis. That's what Brian Lewis wanted. He's like, you have two options, pay him or go to prison for 10 years.
Meyer ended up paying Brian Lewis $10,000 in restitution. Every receipt, a painful memory.
You can see where there's money values all the way down that I've written in too on each date.
What'd that feel like?
Yeah, it hurt. I worked my butt off just to pay that. It rammed me. I mean, I didn't have a chance.
The other worker, he says, was never charged. We tried to find him, but his last name is listed as unknown in the police report.
Asked me what happened to me.
Meyer says he ran into him about a year later.
He goes, they beat me up, took me to my house, got all his stuff back, and then they made me work at Massey until I paid restitution back to Brian Lewis. They was garnishing my paychecks. And I was like, what?
I contacted Nathan Massey, the owner of the company, to ask him about the incident involving the theft from Brian Lewis's house. Massey told me he had no recollection of it. When I asked about the employee who Meyer says was beaten in the back room, Massey said, I don't have anything else to offer you. Massey ran for a House seat last year. It was a nasty race. He lost to Bo Mitchell. And Massey does have ties to the drug court that former Judge Casey Moreland used to run. Remember those halfway houses in Madison where Moreland would send drug court clients? Massey sat on the board of directors for the nonprofit that owns the houses. We've been able to corroborate many of the details of the theft through court records, but we haven't found any court records corroborating the allegations of the beating at Massey Electric, and we can't corroborate other claims by Brad Lewis and Brian Meyer.
Known him all my life. All my life.
Brian Lewis has had a long career in the public light. His brother says he's seen a different side.
It's just all about control and power and money, you know. That's, with him, that's it. That's life.
Our Channel 4 I team broke story after story on Moreland. 2 months into our rolling investigation, federal marshals showed up at the judge's door. They took him away in handcuffs. Moreland charged with attempting to bribe a witness and set her up on phony drug charges. Now the witness was Nancy Amons, the woman who had been the judge's lover, the woman who told her story only to Channel 4. And the U.S. Attorney's Office, they had the money shot.
That is a photo of the money that was offered to person one in this particular case to sign this affidavit.
$5,000 money Judge Casey Moreland allegedly offered to get Nancy Amons to recant the story she told Channel 4. In our exclusive interview, Amons told how Moreland helped get her out of legal trouble. She said they had sex in his office. Judge Moreland appeared in court today the way he normally sees the defendants before him, shackled hand and foot. The U.S. Attorney's Office announced they took him into custody because they feared he was jeopardizing their investigation. The criminal complaint also says Moreland tried to get a police officer to set up Amons on phony drug charges.
Finally, the complaint further alleges that Moreland engaged in conversations and planning to have drugs planted on person one and orchestrate a subsequent traffic stop during which the drugs would be discovered and person one would be arrested and her credibility destroyed.
At a hearing in federal court a few days later, we see the undercover video that forms the backbone of the U.S. Attorney's charges against Moreland. An informant, Wired, records key evidence against the judge.
We're here for the detention hearing and probable cause hearing.
Judge Casey Moreland, in a baggy green jail jumpsuit, sat and listened as federal prosecutors laid out the case against him Friday.
So who does he work for?
He does something for DEA and...
In court, Moreland watched himself on hidden camera, having conversations with an informant wired by the FBI in March. Moreland talked to the informant about finding an officer to plant drugs on his former lover, Nancy Amons, to discredit her.
Is he going to be the one to pull her over? He'll be the one to pull her over. But he's just said, his main thing was like, as long as it don't come back to me.
In the recordings, Moreland also arranges for the man to offer a bribe to Amons, some $6,000, to say she made it all up, that they'd never had sex in his office, and that their explicit text messages were all spoofed. The federal judge heard the evidence and was faced with a decision: let Moreland out on bond until his trial or not. Moreland's defense attorneys called Moreland's wife of 33 years as a character witness. They'd been separated for several weeks. But Jacqueline Moreland said she wanted him home.
He's been a loving father, a kind and loving husband.
She testified Judge Moreland had struggled with alcohol problems and depression, which she said got worse after the media attention from the David Chase case. Chase was that developer accused of domestic assault that Moreland let out early without a mandatory 12-hour hold. He got a call from Chase's attorney, Brian Lewis. Lewis is a friend of the judge's.
He never really fully was back to being Casey from that event. He, during that period of time when he was so depressed, he did start drinking, not every day, but a lot of days.
She said he was also greatly affected when 3 or 4 of his defendants from drug court died of overdoses.
And it was very hard on him because he took it very personally.
Moreland's wife agreed to have her husband at home under house arrest. But prosecutors painted a picture that she might not know her husband as well as she thought. Did she know, for example, he had a disposable cell phone in a fake name?
Ma'am, were you aware that your husband had obtained a burner phone in the name of Raul Rodriguez?
No, ma'am.
And were you aware that your husband had spent in total $6,100 for an affidavit from a witness in this case?
No, I did not.
Thank you. No more questions.
With Moreland off the bench, one of his fellow judges opened up about an alleged bullying incident and how the judge's behavior affected the justice system.
The Honorable Judge Melissa Blackburn presiding.
Judge Melissa Blackburn has never talked publicly about it before, a 2014 incident that caused her to leave the bench with a courtroom full of people in order to deal with an emergency involving Judge Casey Moreland. This is a text she got from one of her female staff members.
Can you come over here? Moreland is pitching an ungodly fit. I see that on my phone, and I'm thinking, what on earth is happening?
It happened here in her staff's offices.
But he was pulling stuff out, ripping things off the walls.
Moreland, she says, was furious that her staff had moved into empty office space that he considered his, removing name signs off the doors, trying at one point to remove a computer from one office.
And the computer was basically pulled away, but they're mounted to the wall, so you can't do anything with them.
Blackburn had only been a judge for 2 months, she says. Her staff was terrified by Moreland, a 6-foot-tall judge in a robe yelling at them, accompanied by an armed court officer.
He intended to intimidate my employees. Some of them are crying. They're petrified. They're fearing for their own safety and fearing for their job. They were so upset. Several were threatening to resign.
Moreland denied raising his voice. He said this during an interview with our I-Team's Alana Altler.
I wasn't screaming or irate. I just asked her who gave her permission to move into my office. And I don't know if she had had a bad day or what. She just started crying, and the next words out of my mouth is, "Why are you crying?"
Well, he thought he could take me on and he could win because I was new and I was a woman, and I refused to let him. I absolutely positively would not let him control me.
There's an interesting twist to the story you've never heard before. Blackburn filed a complaint against Moreland with a board that disciplines judges. And to defend himself, Moreland took a lie detector test. He denied that he spoke unprofessionally, denied grabbing the computer. The polygraph we now know was given at the office of Moreland's close friend, attorney Brian Lewis.
What struck me as odd were there were only 3 questions asked, and that to me seemed very strange.
The Board of Judicial Conduct concluded there weren't sufficient grounds to discipline Judge Moreland. But they are looking at him now, and so is the FBI, for possible public corruption charges. It was prompted by our Channel 4 I-Team investigation. We found Moreland had erased his future son-in-law's jail sentence for a DUI. And we told you that Moreland did favors for 2 women with DUI charges, women who said they'd had sex with him. While our stories were running, Moreland stayed on the bench until the very day U.S. Marshals arrested him.
It was very, very tense around here, the days and weeks between when the investigation was going so heavily and he was still in the courthouse. We were all very much on edge.
Blackburn says to her the most stunning revelation is that an FBI informant recorded Moreland, the judge seen on video, arranging to set up one of the women he'd had sex with, Nancy Amons, by planting drugs on her and having her stopped by the police.
Is he going to be the one to pull her over? But he'll be the one to pull her over. But he's just said, you know, his main thing was like, as long as it don't come back to me.
Once you go there, you've gone off the deep end. You've really done something that you just cannot undo. I cannot fathom that.
The U.S. Attorney's Office says Moreland also tried to bribe Amons, saying he planned to offer her more than $5,000 to say she lied to Channel 4 and to say that the X-rated texts he sent her from the bench were fakes. To Blackburn, those texts changed the way the public sees its judges.
Every time you walk out on that bench, you know that everyone is looking at you, thinking, what have you done? Who are you texting? What are you doing?
An element of trust has been lost.
I think so.
You'll raise your right hand.
A new judge has been sworn in to take Moreland's place, Sam Coleman. Now the task is restoring faith in the system.
There's not an easy fix. It's just us doing what we're supposed to do.
Our Channel 4 I-Team investigation has had an immediate and dramatic impact. The U.S. Attorney's Office indicted the judge, quoting our Channel 4 stories. They're continuing to probe judicial misconduct, saying it could take a year.
Our investigation isn't over. We're still digging. If you have something you think we should know, contact us. I'm Nancy Amons for the Channel 4 I-Team.